What would you sacrifice to save those you love? Today, we journey into the heart of darkness, where one man faces a choice that could save his community or cost him everything. In a village caught between hope and despair, Pastor Elijah was a man of unshakable faith. His life revolved around his church and his people, but that faith was soon to be tested in ways he never imagined. The village had fallen on hard times. Crops withered, families grew desperate, and the church's influence waned. Whispers of hopelessness crept through every corner, and Elijah's prayers felt unanswered. The fields have gone without a harvest for months. What will they eat? The villagers pondered. Some noted, if this situation persists, they will either have to leave or confront starvation. Pastor Elijah, with a calm but weary tone, "My dear friends, I know these are hard times. Our faith is tested, and it feels as if heaven has turned away. But please, don't lose hope. Our prayers will be answered." The villagers exchanged doubtful looks but nod respectfully. Pastor Elijah's words provide a little comfort, but it's clear many have lost faith. Later, in the evening, Pastor Elijah sits alone in the church, deep in prayer. Outside, an elderly villager named Elder Kofi, known for his knowledge of the village's ancient legends, approaches. Elder Kofi, quietly, standing in the church doorway, "Pastor, there is one thing you haven't tried. One last hope, but it is not without cost." Pastor Elijah looks up, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, Elder?" Elder Kofi steps inside, voice low. "There is a relic. A stone, hidden in the heart of the forbidden forest. It's called the Stone of Salvation. They say it grants life and prosperity to any land that claims it." Pastor Elijah, frowning, uneasy, "A relic, hidden in the forest. Why has no one sought it before?" Elder Kofi, gravely, "Because it demands a sacrifice, Pastor. Not of life, but of light, of one's soul. If you touch it, you may bring our village life again, but at a terrible price." Pastor Elijah's eyes darken as he takes in the gravity of the decision. He knows what is at stake for his people. For nights on end, Pastor Elijah wrestled with his faith and his fear. Would he risk his soul to save his people? As dawn broke one morning, he knew what he had to do. The following morning, Pastor Elijah sets out alone at dawn. He walks toward the edge of the forest, the villagers watching him in silence, some of them murmuring prayers. He carries a small pack with a cross, a lantern, and little else. As Pastor Elijah enters the dense forest, the surroundings become ominously quiet. Trees twist overhead, casting eerie shadows. As he ventures deeper, strange sounds, whispers, creaks, emerge, growing louder as he nears the relic's rumored location. Suddenly, he stumbles upon a small clearing where a faint, airy light illuminates a massive stone slab. In the clearing, the Stone of Salvation rests on an altar of ancient vines and roots, glowing with an otherworldly light. Elijah approaches it cautiously, entranced and terrified. The Stone of Salvation, shimmering in the moonlight, both beautiful and terrible. Pastor Elijah felt its power, a force that pulsed with the promise of salvation, but also with something darker, something ancient and hungry. Pastor Elijah, whispering to himself, "Is this the salvation my people need?" He knew that if he touched it, there would be no turning back. The relic demanded not just a sacrifice of life, but of purity, of the light in his soul. Memories of his faith and love for his people flooded his mind, each memory laced with the joy of his calling. But now, his love would demand a sacrifice unlike any other. With a final whispered prayer, Pastor Elijah placed his hand on the stone. He feels an intense warmth and a vision strikes him. The fields of his village lush and green, his church full of joyful faces, and the village thriving. But then, darkness washes over the vision, and he sees himself alone, haunted, as if drained of his very essence. In that moment, he felt his own light begin to fade, his warmth draining into the stone, feeding its ancient hunger. The relic absorbed his spirit, the essence of his faith, leaving him hollow and weary. He recoils, breathing heavily. But the visions of prosperity for his village remain in his mind. Pastor Elijah asked himself, trembling, "If I do this, will I ever be the same?" After a long internal struggle, Elijah closes his eyes, reaches out, and touches the stone. As his hand meets its surface, a surge of energy courses through him, both excruciating and euphoric. The relic begins to glow brighter, and the color seems to drain from Elijah's face as it absorbs his soul's essence. He convulses as memories flash by, his years of faith, his love for the villagers, his dreams for the church. Finally, he collapses onto the ground, weakened and hollow-eyed, as if a part of him has been drained. The following day, Pastor Elijah returns to the village, visibly changed, his skin pale, his eyes distant. But as he steps into the village square, a miracle unfolds. The fields surrounding the village are green and full, the air fresh with the scent of flowers and fertile soil. The villagers rush to greet Pastor Elijah, realizing he has saved them. Embracing him, "Pastor Elijah, you've done it. Look around, the village has come back to life." The villagers cheer, their faces full of joy. Yet, Pastor Elijah merely smiles faintly, unable to share their elation. He gazes around, seeing their happiness but feeling an emptiness within. Weeks pass, and the village continues to prosper. But Pastor Elijah becomes increasingly withdrawn. He struggles to lead the congregation, his sermons lacking the warmth and fervor they once held. One day, a young child named Amma approaches him after a service, tugging at his robe. "Pastor, why don't you smile anymore?" Pastor Elijah looks down, unable to answer. He realizes he can no longer feel the same joy he once did. Pastor Elijah, softly, mostly to himself, because sometimes, to save others, we must lose parts of ourselves. The villagers begin to notice his growing distance and the change in his demeanor, some even whispering about it, but they don't understand the depth of his sacrifice. Elder Kofi visits Pastor Elijah one evening in the church, where the pastor sits alone, staring at the altar. Elder Kofi studies him, concern in his eyes. "Elder Kofi, it's been done, hasn't it? You sacrificed, more than we can ever repay." Pastor Elijah, voice hollow, "I gave my spirit, Elder. I feel the village's happiness, but my soul feels like an echo." "Elder Kofi, you have given us life. But I fear that such a gift has no way of returning what you have lost." Pastor Elijah decides to give one last sermon to the village. Standing before them, he speaks with a tone both somber and resolute. Pastor Elijah began by saying, "There are moments in life when one must give without expectation. I do not regret my choice, for I see your happiness, your prosperity. But remember, true salvation, it is a choice, not without sacrifice." The villagers listen in silence, some understanding the weight of his words, others simply grateful for his sacrifice. Late that night, Pastor Elijah returns to the clearing in the forest. Kneeling beside the stone of salvation, he prays for strength, not to restore his soul, but to accept his fate. He closes his eyes as the relic's light fades, leaving only the memory of the sacrifice he made for his people. Departing from a now flourishing village, which stands as a tribute to Pastor Elijah's sacrifices and the silent heroism that rescued them.